And we're live on YouTube.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is council meeting number 2 for the new year, Wednesday, January 19th. We are just coming out of a closed session and are now in open session, and the closed matter was about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. So we recessed that session and we are now going into our public council meeting, our open council meeting, I should say. A fairly light agenda. We adopted the agenda at the commencement of our meeting at 5:30 p.m. today. So we are now at the point where I will ask for disclosures of interest in regards to items on the agenda this evening. And of course, this is in regards to perceived or real financial benefit or loss in regards to any item arising on the agenda.
Mayor Peckford, I'd like to declare disclosure of interest for item 4.2, I believe, on the list for the Ag and Rural CIP.
Okay, thank you very much. And I understand, Councillor Strachan, that you'll just mute and turn off your video for that section. We appreciate your disclosure. Okay, so with that in mind, we don't have any presentations this evening. Of course, these remain COVID times. So of course, this is a Zoom meeting. Councillors and staff are, I think, for the most part, doing these meetings from home. We just have one item rather under the consent agenda, and that's our meeting minutes from December 8th. So I'll just look for a mover and a seconder to adopt the singular item under the consent agenda, please. Mover and seconder. Councillor O'Sullivan and Barkley, thank you very much. And I'll call the question on those minutes. All in favor, please. Thank you. Excellent. Appreciate that. Also, apart from that, we don't have any reports from the CAO, Finance, or Office of the Clerk. But of course, under Planning and Development, we just have 2 items this evening, and the first is the transition plans for conservation authorities. And I believe, Ms. Martin, thank you for joining us this evening. You're here just to speak quickly to that report.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I put just a very quick presentation together for council. This is probably our lightest planning meeting to date. I promise you that there are lots of exciting things coming forward in 2022 on the development side that we will be excited to present throughout the year. But for this evening, I have the pleasure just to walk you through very briefly some changes that have occurred to the Conservation Authorities Act and some things that will be happening at the Conservation Authority level that will trickle back down here at the local level. Next slide, please. So on October 21st, 2021, Bill 229 received royal assent from the province, which brought in a series of amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act. This included 3 new regulations, one including the definition and defining of the mandatory programs and services that conservation authorities are mandated to provide. Requiring for those services that are not mandated but conservation authorities do offer a transition plan to address agreements for those programs and services, as well as the establishment of rules of conduct in the conservation areas. So the presentation tonight will only deal with matters that have arisen through the first 2 regulations. Next slide, please. So the Conservation Authorities Act under the new regulation defines a mandatory program as it relates to flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, hazardous sites as defined in the provincial policy statement, and low water drought as part of Ontario's low water response. So typically these are items that you would also find within the provincial policy statement, which is the provincial planning document that planners use throughout the province. Next slide, please. So mandatory programs and services are meant to help manage the risk posed by natural hazards within each jurisdiction. And the intent of these programs are to identify natural hazards, assess risks associated with natural hazards, including impacts of climate change, manage risks associated with natural hazards, and promote public awareness of natural hazards. So managing these risks may include such programs that promote prevention, protection, mitigation, preparedness, and response. So these are items that conservation authorities are already doing. And we see it on the development side, especially in our planning applications, when we're dealing with hazards such as floodplain. The CAs do a lot to provide information around, how do you mitigate when you're located within a floodplain, protecting development, and providing that public awareness and preparedness in the event of an emergency. Next slide, please. So the second regulation that was implemented through Bill 229 was the requirement for conservation authorities to develop transitionary plans. So the regulation set some key dates, and I'm going to walk through both South Nation and Rideau Valley, who have both of their conservation areas overlap North Grenville. They abut each other. Both have prepared plans provided to the municipality, and their timelines are exactly the same. I imagine for most conservation authorities, they're following the same timelines. So there are two ways when we're dealing with non-mandatory programs in which conservation authorities can work with municipalities, and one is through municipal agreements. A really good example of a municipal agreement that we have with Rideau Valley Conservation is in regard to our source water protection. So that's our safe drinking water. So they it is a mandated program through the province, and every municipality must have a source water protection plan. So Rideau Valley and Mississippi the Mississippi Conservation Authority as well have teamed up, and they oversee the creation and the implementation of that plan. So we have a municipal agreement with that Rideau Valley to provide that level of service to us. There are also municipal cost apportioning agreements. So these could be additional services that there's an additional levy in which we would pay for. And we also have memorandums of understanding and other agreements for services that might be beyond the scope of a conservation authority. An example of that would be the municipality may contract their expertise. So we could have their hydrogeologist do hydrogeological reviews on any applications where we require it. Otherwise, the municipality, in certain cases, we would use a third party because we wouldn't have those expertise in-house. So the Conservation Authority could be a partner that we would look towards to provide those professional expertise, but there's often an associated cost to that. But those are typically billed back to the developer as part of a development application. Next slide, please. So the conservation authorities broke down their transition plan into two phases. So the first phase is to identify all of those programs and services that they provide and create an inventory. And that will be done in coordination by reviewing existing agreements that they have in place, but also working with their municipal partners to understand what our needs are moving forward so that they can ensure that they capture those. It is anticipated that the circulation of the inventory to the member municipalities under each conservation authority as well as the ministry would happen by the end of February. So it's actually coming up quite soon. Next slide, please. The next phase would more speaks to the deliverables that they owe to the ministry. So giving status reports, and the end goal is to have any agreement in place for any non-mandatory service by January 1st of 2024. So the municipality will work with both of our conservation partners to better understand what services that they provide that are mandatory and what are some of the services they would provide that would fall outside of that category, and we'll work to identify those and bring any necessary agreements to council for their decision. And again, like as noted on the slide, they must have agreements in place by the 1st of January. So we would anticipate over the next 2 years that we would start to see memorandums of understanding or municipal agreements coming forward to municipal councils to solidify any of these non-mandatory services. And I believe that is the last slide on this. I will take any questions from that members of council may have on this.
Thank you, Ms. Martin, for your report. And again, for context, this is because the provincial government made arguably significant adjustments or some adjustments, depending on how you saw that legislation, which then compelled, it compelled municipalities to opt into some of these services that were previously sort of delivered sort of pro forma as part of the Conservation Authority work. Is that correctly stated? I just want to provide that context.
Yeah, I believe that to be a true statement. My understanding as well is, especially in some of the larger areas, with larger conservation authorities, there was a concern of overreach in certain regards. So that's where the province has stepped in to really define what the mandate of the conservation authorities are through the mandatory programs, and making sure that any program that is not mandated through the province has the appropriate agreements and cost apportioning around it.
Okay, sounds good. We appreciate the report. Council colleagues, any questions? Council Barkley?
Yeah, thank you. Amy, am I to assume that these 5 programs that are mandatory were optional previous to passing this new law?
Through your worship, to Councillor Barkley, the mandatory programs have been mandated for quite a while. They are anything that's natural hazard related, it has been within the mandate of the conservation authorities, and you'll see that within our own planning documents, because we put a lot of rigor and policy around those natural hazards. So that's not something new, and that's not a surprise to the municipality in that regard. I would, at least as a minimum, expect those would be the programs that would be mandated.
So they're not currently mandated.
Sorry, anything related to natural hazards is a mandate of the Conservation Authority.
Okay, but I thought from the first slide that this new legislation is making them mandatory. Did I misread that? Did I misread that?
I mean, just to clarify, they're just further defining that they're mandatory. They already are mandatory. It's just the province has taken the extra step to say, these are the mandatory programs in order to separate them out from the non-mandatory.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Again, this was a bit of a hot button issue when the province brought in this legislation. So there were myriad of comments and concerns and some accolades expressed at that time for a tightening up, if you will, a clarification of what conservation authorities must do versus what municipalities can contract them to do. And I think that's the distinction Amy's trying to make here. Anything else on this? It's certainly great to know where we have, relationships with the conservation authorities that will continue, that, we had built and want to leverage and provide good service to our residents. It's great to hear that obviously those remain intact and there's no reason they wouldn't. I don't see any other comments or questions. So
Madam Mayor.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't see the yellow hand. It blended into your photo.
I will change the color of my hand.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess for Madam Mayor and for the rest of council and staff as well, is that the board of directors for the RVCA actively is discussing this pretty much at every meeting. There's one point on the agenda that covers these changes and what's coming forward and so on. And the key folks in key positions there have reiterated the fact that the RVCA is always willing to come before council to give presentations on any topic. So if we require further clarification or any other details and so on, that we may want to hear from the RVCA's perspective, notwithstanding Director Martin's thorough explanation of where things are at, they are willing to do that. So it may be something that we consider down the line to invite them to one of our meetings, perhaps to give an update and then for a chance for us to ask questions as well. So just putting that out there for food for thought.
Thank you. And of course, you are sitting on the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority as the municipal rep right now. Is that correct, Councillor Strachan?
It is.
Right. I know we have two, so sometimes I mix them up. But thank you very much for reminding us that you're having these conversations as part of the board on a fairly regular basis. Okay. I see Councillor O'Sullivan's hand. It's nice and bright, not blending into a photo. So Councillor O'Sullivan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to confirm that it's very good to have Councillor Strachan on the RVCA and to have a council representative on that is I think mutually beneficial for both us and the RVCA. So thank you, Councillor Strachan, for ably representing us on that board.
Okay, awesome. Anything else, colleagues? I don't see any other hands. Am I missing hands? Okay. Ms. Martin, do you have a final comment before we look to a motion?
just to say, Your Worship, that staff will be bringing back any more information that we receive from the Conservation Authority, just to keep you apprised of where they're at. And certainly I can work with the RVC as well to get any information that that council would like to see in regard to these matters.
Okay. So the proposed motion is that council receives the report on transition plans for conservation authorities, changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. And of course, this is just for information purposes this evening. Councillor Strachan, would you like to move that?
Yes.
Okay, seconder, please. Councillor Barclay, thank you. I will call the question. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. That passes, and thank you, Ms. Martin, for your efforts. And I think you're now on deck for the Rural and Agricultural Community Improvement Plan feasibility study. And I know Councillor Strachan is opting out of this portion of the meeting due to her declaration of disclosure. So we'll pass it over to you. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to bring council back to September of last year, when the Rural and Agricultural Committee brought forward a recommendation to council to have staff investigate bringing forward a rural and agricultural community improvement plan. Staff presented to council back in December, just providing them with just a very high level overview of what a rural and agricultural community improvement plan is, and the direction sought at that time was to prepare a feasibility study. So the planning staff have gone through, and we'll go to the next slide, please, and reviewed other area municipalities within Eastern Ontario and beyond, including Southwestern Ontario, where there are agricultural and rural community improvement plans to better understand what types of programs are offered and an approximate dollar value associated to supporting such of these programs. So part of the research looked at, from a feasibility perspective, what kind of programs are out there. And at the end, I provide a bit of a recommendation as to should council support a rural and agricultural community improvement plan, the types of programs that should be included. So a rural and agricultural community improvement plan can be wide and varied, and it can address both agricultural businesses or rural businesses, which could include your rural industrial, rural commercial, your hamlet areas where you might have some smaller businesses, including boutique shops and restaurants. The programming can go towards refurbishing existing buildings to support our agriculture and agri-food business, upgrading road signage to make it easier for wayfinding, building a simple roadside structure to allow businesses to sell products, so roadside farm stands for larger farms or even smaller farms who have ample produce that they want to sell to the public. Allowing new and existing businesses to seek professional assistance to create marketing and business plans, again, supporting some of those smaller businesses in the rural and agricultural area, and allowing businesses to professionally train new and existing employees, as well as the purchasing of new technology and equipment. Next slide, please. Programs also include property tax relief, renovations associated with tourism-related businesses, funding to stimulate investment in tourism and agritourism, and on-farm value-added opportunities, funding to support the enhancement of streetscapes, development charge fee reductions for desired and identified business types. Next slide, please. So there's a ton of programs that could be applied in the rural and agricultural area for a community improvement plan. And it would really depend on how you would want to target the general community, the business community outside of our urban area. We currently do have a community improvement plan, but it just applies to the downtown and it doesn't pick up any of our rural, including our hamlet businesses. So based on a review of the programs that could be offered, and just as a cursory, as a community improvement plan in the rural agricultural area starting out, it's staff's recommendation that there be 4 areas that we'd start off looking at, and that would be helping and assisting in professional studies grants. So this could be a feasibility study to help the expansion of a business. It could help pay for engineering drawings, anything that helps that's related to that development process on the professional studies side. A signage program. Signage is huge in the rural area. I think we've lost the ability to tell people you drive, go 4 miles and turn left at the old Red Barn, as we used to do back in the day. I know growing up in a small rural community, that's often how you wayfind. But it's not, that's not the case nowadays, especially with new people to the community and people coming out to our area for tourism. Development fees grants, so offsetting, and that could both be development charges, planning fees, building permit fees, and then business improvement grants. So that could include things such as facade improvements or accessibility. So it'd be kind of a bit of a catch-all, and you could further define those types of programs. I wanted to be a little clear on the tourism side, because I do recognize that our tourism strategy identified a tourism community improvement plan. So this plan would not include grant programs geared toward tourism. That would happen under another CIP that could be developed as part of that tourism strategy, although there could be synergies with this program, especially in regards to matters such as signage or development fee grants. That could be accessed, especially for our any business that might have that tourism aspect outside of the the urban area. Next slide, please. So we looked at a proposed funding envelope, and I do want to mention that I took the feasibility study first to the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee to have that discussion, because they're very invested within this process. That's where the recommendation began to explore this option. So the recommendation that staff had originally brought was for a pool of around $25,000, and that was more in line with what some of the more rural communities in Eastern Ontario have offered for their programs. But the committee had requested that value be doubled to $50,000 to actually allow for more opportunity. So it could mean our incentive funding envelope might be a little higher in certain regards, or it would allow for more people to apply, just depending on the final values that would be set within the community improvement plan itself. The value of the grant would be considered on an annual basis as part of the budget. So that value could grow or it could shrink, just depending on the demand of the program. And as of right now, no funds have been allocated in the 2022 budget. So this is an unbudgeted fund, and it has not been considered as part of the 2022 budget. Back in December, when this was brought to council, based on our discussion, it was asked that some facts be brought forward as part of and ahead of the budget process for council's consideration. So at this time, I believe that ends my formal presentation, but I'm more than happy to take questions from members of council.
Okay, I see Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Barkley. Okay, good. And I just want to say, as a member of the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee, and this is a committee that I committed to reinitiating subsequent to my election, it's really great to see this come forward, Amy. And we know how much enthusiasm there is around that Ag and Rural Affairs table, among other tables, to balance out, right, what has been a fairly urban focused CIP to Ag and Rural Affairs or Ag and Rural domains. So great to see this getting off the ground. I'll go to Councillor O'Sullivan and then Councillor Barkley, please.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions right now. What other municipalities do this in the United Counties? Are there other municipalities in United Counties that have a program like this?
Through your worship to Councillor Sullivan, I'm not intimately aware of any in Leeds and Grenville, but I do know SDG next door every municipality has a CIP with a focus on rural and ag, including the county. They put a lot of funding into the CIP itself for agribusiness and other related agritourism and rural businesses. I'm Southwestern Ontario, they're quite prolific, but I'm not certain as to Leeds and Grenville itself. My past experience has heavily been in SDG, so I'm very familiar with this area. So it was easy to draw upon my past experience from here.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, do you require matching funds from the agricultural business owner to go along with what we provide in this incentive?
That certainly can be a provision of a program. So the CIP itself, when it's written, would define the parameters as to the dollar value. So most programs are matching funds. So you up to a maximum value, depending on what you set those values at. So that ensures that the business owner is putting some of their own dollars towards it and not fully relying upon the grant. You could do 100% dollars, but 50% dollars is quite common.
Okay, thanks. And then that was my next question is there a minimum or a maximum amount that's given out per owner or per business owner?
Yep. Yeah, and the plan would define that. You'd want to set some, maybe not minimum values. Certain programs you might, just because you want to have maybe a larger investment, especially when you're talking any kind of refurbishment or renovation of any larger building. You know that that's not going to be a small undertaking, but definitely you want to put a maximum cap on there so that you're not completely withdrawing all your funds for one project.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Councillor Barkley, please.
Thanks, Amy. Like the mayor, I sit on the Ag and Rural Affairs Committee. It's great that we have one. I've long said that I believe in North Grenville we have untapped potential for local food production, processing, and distribution. So it's nice to see that one of the programs or in the basket of programs that we're considering are wayfinding signs and something that can facilitate farm gate sales, because I think there's an interest, certainly with COVID keeping people at home and getting interested in gardening and maybe even market gardening. There's a great opportunity to strengthen something like the Kentville Farmers Market by encouraging people to maybe test the waters with farm gate sales and participating in the Kentville Farmers Market. So just to Councillor O'Sullivan's question about where else it's happening, I know in my work previous to council, when I was on the Farmers Market and the Economic Advisory Committee, that Lanark County and SDG are really eating our lunch in terms of promotion of local food production, processing, and distribution. There was a map published, I think, by Lanark County, sort of pointing out where all the market farmers, farm gate sales were, and North Grenville at that time, back in 2014, 15, it was a big black hole. So I'd like to see us really get behind this program, specifically on local food production and processing, anything to support the farmers market and farm gate sales. So those are two things I would underline from my perspective that's worth having in the rural CIP. My question is there facility to have the creation of workshops or training sessions of supporting people who would like to share their expertise in terms of market gardening or processing or vending at a farmer's market? Is that something that somebody could apply for, to run a workshop?
Ms. Martin?
Through your worship to Councillor Barkley, I'd have to look into see if other municipalities have done it to provide funds to run workshops. Typically the programs are more based around the physical building improvements and supporting that growth, but certainly something I could investigate to see if there is that opportunity to bring in individuals as part of a business to run workshops.
So just to follow up, with the kind of agri-tech that we're trying to promote through the campus, maybe I noticed one line that you had there about studies, maybe a study about the feasibility of running workshops at the campus might be something. I'm not sure who would apply for it. I don't know if the campus would qualify as an applicant, but they wouldn't be in the rural areas as defined right now. But I'm wondering if you can see some way that the campus could get involved in applying through the CIP to run some agricultural workshops of some sort.
Yes, understood. And that's something that if a plan is developed, that's what we could definitely look at on the program side, is what other types of programs may be appropriate outside of I know it was a bit of a brief list, but it is those items can be quite broad in the programs that go underneath them, but definitely not closed off to considering other programs that could go into a rural and agricultural CIP.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Any other questions at this stage? We appreciate Ms. Merton that I know you're a bit under the weather, so thank you for joining us. I think it's a great step in the right direction, and as you can tell, lots of enthusiasm. I would note, Councillor Barkley, that the Kemptville Farmers Market sees thousands, tens of thousands of visitors a month for the 6 months it's open. So I think leveraging on some of that success may be very interesting, but I know they've been doing a fantastic job with limited resources and a very strong partnership with the B&H, which is nice to see. I see Deputy Mayor's got his hand up.
Yes, just for a quick comment, Amy, great work on this, by the way, and I look forward to seeing the final draft of the actual program. It's, you know, I've always been behind the CIP programs, no matter where they are. I think they're very important, and I think they're a great stimulus for a small community. So good work. Thank you.
Okay. I have kids running around the back of the chair, so trying to shield you all from the kid activity that swirls around me. Okay, Deputy Mayor, thank you for those comments. We look forward to the next step, and I think tonight's job, council, is to direct staff to prepare rural and agricultural community improvement plan and approve 50,000 from the 2022 budget, which is still obviously under deliberation, but in this case, we're talking about general reserves to support the rural and agricultural community improvement plan. So Amy, just quick clarification. You are asking council to dedicate 50,000 from the general reserves in the context of the 2022 budget to enable this work. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay, I see Councillor O'Sullivan has her hand up, so go ahead, Councillor O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just concerned about the general reserves. I just want to be sure that we are not depleting our general reserves more than we should be. And is this an appropriate use of the general reserves? I mean, I certainly support the program. I just want to be sure that we're not depleting our general reserves more than we should be.
Okay, Ms. Martin, do you have any comment on that at this time? And then I see Councillor Barkley.
Thank you, Your Worship. The funding typically for such programs have come from the general reserves. I would rely on the acting director of finance to provide more of a statement because I am not qualified to provide that, because that is not something I have oversight over. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't provide more of a response to that this time. Okay,
and your comment is that typically or historically CIPs have been funded out of general reserves? Is that the statement you were trying to make?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that may be why in tonight's motion we see that reference to general reserves.
That's correct.
Okay, Councillor Barkley, did you want to get in there, or are you good now?
The comment I would make on Councillor O'Sullivan's concerns is last year the former Director of Finance characterized our reserves as being healthy, and certainly when we start dealing with the budget as a whole, that's something we can look closely at to address Councillor O'Sullivan's concerns and everybody's concern. We don't want to leave ourselves without appropriate reserves.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barkley. I know that the previous Director of Finance had said that our reserves were healthy, and yet I thought when we had the presentation from the auditor that he kind of said that we needed more. And so I just wanted to be certain that we're not depleting our reserves more than we should be, and that we are at the healthy percentage of reserves. Now, if this is the way that such programs are typically funded, then that's fine. I just don't want us to be caught between a rock and a hard place down the road if we use too many reserves.
Agreed. Nobody does.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll look for, to your point, Councillor Sullivan, I think there may be a longer discussion to have around that when it comes to the budget, which will be before us in about a month. But in the meantime, given what we see on the table, I will look for a mover and a seconder, and we'll test the appetite of council to proceed. Councillor Barclay and Deputy Mayor. I've also alerted our CAO to that question. So even if the motion passes this evening, we can, get more of an explanation on the reserve strategy in this case, so that might provide, greater comfort at this stage. Okay, so I don't see any other comments or hands, so I will call the question. All in favor of the motion as read? Thank you. Any opposition, Councillor Sullivan? Are you opposing or approving? Okay. Okay, well, that passes. Thank you very much. And Ms. Martin, I know there'll be much more discussion at the Ag and Rural Affairs Committee, so appreciate your efforts and that of your team. We don't have anything under Public Works, Parks and Rec, Emergency and Protective Services. We haven't received any correspondence. No other business. I will ask colleagues if anyone has a notice of motion this evening. Wouldn't want to miss that opportunity. I know in the past I've glossed over this one. No notices of motion. Thank you very much. I do not believe we have any bylaws to consider this evening. Am I correct, Ms. Babcock-Cormier?
You are correct, Your Worship.
Okay, excellent. And then I'll look to you. Have you received any questions by email or through other channels in regards to items on the agenda this evening? And I'm, of course, speaking specifically about members of the media or members of our community.
I confirm that I have not, Your Worship.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So with that in mind, should we proceed with the confirmation bylaw, or would that come after we go into closed once again, Ms. Babcock-Cormier?
That would after you go into closed at the end of the meeting of the closed
excellent.
meeting.
So as stated at the beginning, we had recessed a closed session that was dealing specifically with an identifiable individual. And we are going to resume that portion of the meeting with council colleagues, I believe the clerk and our CAO. So Ms. Babcock-Cormier, is there a separate link for that meeting? What's the procedure? Oh, you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
Thank you. We're going to turn off the live streaming.